In 2002, Sucker Punch released Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, and introduced the world to a new flagship mascot series with tense stealth platforming and a cast of lovable characters. In the decade following this initial release, the Sly Cooper games attracted a relatively large fan base within the gaming community, and much of that praise and enjoyment stemmed from how Sly Cooper 2, Band of Thieves, took the groundwork laid out by its prequel and elevated the gameplay and storytelling to new heights. Today, though, we take a look at that groundwork that was laid by Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, which I'll be calling Sly 1 for the remainder of this video. This video will obviously be spoiling every aspect of the title, as I'll be dissecting the game's narrative and presentation, but more specifically, its gameplay mechanics. So again, huge spoilers ahead, you've been warned. I've also went ahead and included timestamps in the description below in case you want to jump to a certain section to pick up where you left off, because I know this will be a pretty lengthy video. I guess I should also mention now that the footage comes from the Sly Trilogy Remastered Collection that was released for PlayStation 3 and not the original PlayStation 2 release. Also, even though I'm using a PlayStation 4 Pro, I am recording off the PlayStation Now service, which sometimes doesn't have the best quality options for displays, so my apologies in advance if any footage doesn't look its absolute best. The last point I want to mention for full disclosure is that I am a mega fan of this franchise, just like many others, but that doesn't mean I turn a blind eye to the flaws within each title, and it just so happens that I think Sly 1 has the most. You could argue this game was built for children, but that doesn't make the game immune from criticism. And besides that, if you watch the developer commentary, they mentioned that they wanted this to be a game that both children and adults could enjoy. Now, with all the preliminary stuff out of the way, I'm going to throw 3 statements out there. One on gameplay, one on narrative, and one on presentation that have pretty much driven my thought process throughout writing this script and creating this video. Let's start with the first, which is about gameplay. After revisiting the game for this massive project, it's clear that while Sly 1 laid a solid foundation for the later games to evolve, this original title didn't trust its core platforming gameplay enough to focus solely on it or to make challenging levels around it. In terms of narrative, the game excels at world building, but the main plot is adolescent and simple in nature, although that complaint was pretty standard for platformers of the time. And finally, the last point on presentation would be that the game has a distinct style and atmosphere that blends a cartoon and comic aesthetic quite nicely. However, the level design is inconsistent in quality because of the game's insistence on including minigames. These 3 thoughts were my driving force for this critique, and I'd say they remain true even if Sly 1 had never gotten a sequel. Simultaneously, while it's impossible to say that with 100% certainty that games of the last 17 years didn't affect my thoughts on this game, I can comfortably say I've done my best to view this game in a vacuum. So without further ado, let's get into this critique of Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus. Right away, the game begins its world building in what I would call a pretty good tutorial that sets up the rest of the game quite nicely. It starts with a shot of a French flag flying high as we are given a location and time, Paris, 4:20 a.m. Now, seeing that as an adult, all I can think of is 420 Blaze It Weed memes, but anyway, the scene soon transitions to our hero, Sly Cooper, moving across rooftops. Over the next few quick cuts, we learn a bit about Sly's skill set. He has the speed to get across rooftops quickly, a weapon powerful enough to break through small objects, and the agility and balance to move across narrow ledges without problem. Finally, Sly arrives at the police station where we are greeted by the main menu. By pressing start, we immediately begin the game. No additional cutscenes and no loading screens, and this greatly adds in not breaking the atmosphere that was just created by the opening cutscene. From here, a high-tech set of binoculars opens, and we are greeted by two characters. The one on the right is recognizable as Sly, the main character of the title, while also being introduced to Bentley the Turtle, who appears on the left. At this point, we really don't know anything about these characters, but through smart writing and voice acting, we can infer that Sly is the field man, while Bentley is the brains of the operation who plans and coordinates the team's efforts. Sly is informed by Bentley that he will only be able to break into the police HQ by going through an air vent, and honestly, what says thieving more than sneaking in through an air vent? We are then briefly introduced to Murray, although his role in the gang isn't made crystal clear yet. On the police rooftop, the first bit of gameplay begins, as players are free to move around the rooftop where they can experiment with the button layout. Pressing square near breakable objects sees Sly smashing that object with his cane weapon, and as you'd expect, pressing X results in a jump, twice for a double jump. Then, in one of the most egregious cases of fourth wall breaking, the player is informed through another dialogue with Bentley that holding the circle button down will result in Sly being able to perform stealth moves. In this case, it results in him moving around a water tower using its ledge. We then jump over two platforms and smash out the air vent cover in order to move on. Already within just a few minutes, we have been taught the three integral aspects of progressing in the game: jumping, breaking objects, and performing super sneaky stealth moves. Sure, they are simple mechanics, but it's good to note that the game establishes them within a minute of the game starting because they define your actions for the rest of the game. Next, one type of obstacle is established: tripwire alarms that have to be triggered twice in order to damage Sly. We will talk more about this later, but again, it's a concise way of offering up a small snippet of the challenges that you can expect to find throughout your playthrough. Smashing the alarm bell lets us move forward where we are to search for Carmelita's office. Upon finding the door, we have to use an outside balcony to gain entrance, and it's a quick way of reinforcing that players will often have to take stealthy or sneaky approaches while navigating through levels, as well as reminding them that the circle button is the key to those movements. I also love how a little bit of the ledge crumbles and falls, which further emphasizes Sly's incredible balancing skills. The platform he stands on is about to crumble, but yet he still moves along it with grace and ease. It's another way of showing his physical prowess instead of just telling us. Soon we arrive in Carmelita's office, where we open a safe to gather a secret police file on Sly. Again, this is another thing players will be doing throughout their journey, so it's good to establish it early on. Studying this room, we can deduce that Sly is a pretty talented criminal, given that Carmelita's only wanted posters are of him, and that the Fox cop has a fixation on his arrest given his prominence. This is a small detail that most players will miss, but if you do notice it, it effectively alludes to the next bit of dialogue. Escaping out the window, Sly is confronted by Inspector Carmelita Montoya Fox. From their dialogue, we can learn a few things about their relationship. First, despite being on opposite sides of the law, there is romantic attraction between them, at least from Sly. We also start to see more of Sly's personality. He's focused, he's sarcastic, and he's witty. And second, we learn that Carmelita has been pursuing Sly for a long time, but has never been able to catch the criminal. Just by exchanging a few sentences, we understand the dynamic between these two characters, and that there is conflict at the heart of it. It's well written, but its display is a bit awkward, with parts of each 3D model twitching, and Carmelita's entrance being a bit strange. I mean, she jumps in and her mouth moves, but she doesn't talk, and then she jumps down again and actually begins talking. I don't know, it's just really awkward looking. After the exchange, the tutorial is nearly complete. Most of it so far has been pretty smooth sailing, so long as you didn't trip the alarm. But now there is a ton of tension as the music picks up and the cop starts raining down electric charges at you. You wouldn't realize it on a first playthrough, but the threat level is actually pretty low here. You can stand perfectly still, and Carmelita won't shoot Sly on her first or second shot. Given how panicked the situation is, most players won't spend any time standing still and will instead sprint for the getaway van. This allows the player to escape with ease without ever making them aware of how easy it truly was. It creates that sense of a narrow escape that you'd expect in an action crime thriller. Following the tutorial's conclusion, a cutscene plays that establishes a lot about this world very quickly. Here, we learn about Sly's connection to Carmelita, his upbringing, his ancestry, his relationship with Bentley and Murray, and what the overall mission will be for the game. We learn that Sly is the latest family member of a long line of master thieves who have prided themselves on stealing from the corrupted rich in a Robin Hood-esque way. Despite its cartoon aesthetic, many parents may not have been too keen on buying their child a game in which they play as a thief, but by making Sly steal from criminals, he is established as one of the good guys. We can also sympathize with this character as we learn that when he was a child, his parents were killed by a criminal organization known as the Fiendish Five. Each member of this villainous cohort took a section of the Thievius Raccoonus, the family heirloom that detailed all the adventures and techniques of Sly's thieving ancestors. From here, Sly ended up in an orphanage, and that's where he met Bentley and Murray. Bentley is officially established as the intellectual of the group, while Murray is, just kind of there as the dumb friend. More on this as we go through the video, but Murray's purpose in this game is half-baked, and he is the weakest of any main character in the title. From here, the gang of friends have vowed to avenge Sly's parents and steal back the pages of the Thievius Raccoonus after learning each member's location from the police file they just stole in the tutorial. Our game is about to truly begin, but first we are introduced to an interactable level select screen. This is basically the team's hideout, where we can watch movies and select levels to play. A nice little touch here is that even though the episodes must be played in order, you can preview the next episode's aesthetic a bit while interacting with Murray. As previously mentioned, Murray is the weakest character out of the three, although interestingly enough, he may have the most character growth. Either way, at least these short interactions with him give him a little bit more life. I wish they had done the same for Bentley, but instead, he offers a chance to rewatch cutscenes. With that out of the way, we are ready to jump into our first world. The game is broken up into 5 worlds, and each of them, outside of the last, houses 7 levels with a main hub area that connects all those levels. Before gameplay though, each area is introduced alongside its main villain in a brief cutscene. Here, we meet the first member of the Fiendish Five, which once again is the organization that killed Sly's parents, and his name is Sir Raleigh the Frog. We learn that Raleigh was a rich kid who never had any thrills, and so this led him to a life of piracy in order to feel alive. We will see that for the first 4 villains of this game, boredom or feelings of inadequacy in childhood is what led each of them to become evil, which is actually a pretty dangerous concept if you think about it too much. Either way, it's a pretty cliche attempt of getting us to slightly sympathize with the villain, but it doesn't work as much with Raleigh as it will with some of the others. The cutscene ends with a great title card introducing the chapter as if it were an episode in a TV series, and this is a little touch that I continue to love about the Sly Cooper games. Following the intro cutscene, we begin our first real level of the game, a Stealthy Approach. The first 4 worlds will all be structured this way, starting with a level that leads you into the bad guy's lair, and then moving through different levels within that lair until reaching the boss. The consistency of it allows players to know what to expect as they play through the game. As we enter into the first area of this level, Bentley quickly cuts into the action with a dialogue exchange that explains exactly what to do. This will become a somewhat common occurrence throughout this title, and even though I enjoy how these cutscenes display each character's personality, I think it's decidedly bad that the player is told exactly where to go before they even get a chance to see the first section for themselves. Many players might head straight for the ladder to progress, and it undermines the very light exploration elements within the title. I mean, even if you take just a few seconds to look around here, you'll probably stumble upon another way to get across the gate. In fact, this second approach is more rewarding because it gets you past the searchlight traps without having to deal with them. I understand that this game was made with a focus on adults as well as children, but I wish the developers had trusted the strength of their level design more and not told us exactly what to do right away. Regardless, this level shows off one of the strengths of the title, the ability to make platforming obstacles feel believable to the environment that they're found in. In this level alone, we will deal with climbing over security gates, getting past searchlights, rushing through fast-moving water, and moving across turbines that are undoubtedly powering this area. No obstacle feels out of place. This is also true for the enemy design, but more on combat later. And as a side note, you may notice me hitting clue bottles throughout this footage, but again, more on that later. This level, like the other platforming ones in the game, is completely linear, which you'd expect from this genre. There are 1 to 2 checkpoints throughout each level that mark your progress in case you die. Sly is many things, but tanky is not one of them. He goes down in one hit, whether that be from an activated alarm or enemies who are attacking you. Every time you die, you lose a life, in which you have 5 at the start of the game, and more on that later. The checkpoints are nice though, because even though the game isn't very difficult in any sense, having to restart an entire level because of a mess up feels tedious. As we wrap up this first area, we grab a treasure key. Every level within the first 4 worlds has a treasure key at the end, and these are basically used as progress checks. You can't move on until you gather enough of them. This concludes the first level and brings us to our first hub world. Bentley introduces us to Raleigh's ship and gives us a clear path forward for what we have to do to progress. There is an electric pipe that can only be turned off by using 3 treasure keys to get at the generator. I appreciate the little touch that it's not just a giant door with 3 locks. Instead, it's explained that the generator keeping the pipe powered up is locked off, and it creates an in-universe reason for why we need the keys instead of just giving us some arbitrary locked door. We also get a nice exchange that shows off Bentley and Sly's dynamic a bit more. On one hand, Bentley is skeptical that Sly will be able to progress, and that's based off of his analytical mind and his understanding of the probability of the situation. While on the other hand, Sly is confident enough to know that he will figure out a way to get it done, and he isn't worried in the slightest. These 2 characters will have more dialogue than any others throughout the game, so it's good to see their personalities are juxtaposed to a degree. As we make our way towards Raleigh's flagship, we find a lucky charm. These are basically one-time damage absorbers that prevent Sly from dying upon taking a hit. Unlike in games like Super Mario Bros., where the power-ups provide an additional benefit alongside of absorbing damage, these lucky charms are nothing more than offsets to damage. However, you can collect 2 at a time. Even though they're simple in execution, they get the job done, because the controls are sometimes just a bit finicky, and it can lead to some pretty cheap deaths, and these charms help to offset that. As we finally get up onto the ship, we hear Raleigh giving a speech to his men about how they need to work harder to capture more ships. Raleigh is essentially using a storm machine to crash nearby ships in order to steal their loot without ever having to move his base. Raleigh is easily the least interesting villain in the game because it's very hard to sympathize or relate to him in any sense. He's basically evil for the sake of being evil. However, since we don't get to spend a lot of time interacting with any of the villains in this game, it's good that they included these loudspeaker messages to give us more insight on the villain's personality.
I demand the boiler stay at full pressure at all times. If you lazy, lowbrow, technically incompetent pack of gutter snipes did your jobs right, we'd have sunk 100 ships by now. But of course, 50 boats is a fine achievement. Carry on, my boys, carry on.
Exploring what we can of Raleigh's ship, we discover that there are 4 levels for us to enter, although only 2 of them are immediately obvious. Players will quickly find a new enemy type patrolling a gate. So far, all the enemies have spotted you quickly and started their attack animation, but this guard does not follow that same protocol. Instead, he wields the mighty flashlight, and if you step into it, he hits you with a projectile attack that is impossible to dodge. It serves as a trade-off. Most enemies spot you right away, but give you ample time to dodge their attack. This enemy, on the other hand, can only spot you if you're within his easily identified area of sight, but if you do get spotted, you're gonna take damage. Around this area, we also find 1-ups for our life counter and a lucky charm. These items respawn upon death or re-entering the area, and they're smartly placed. This is still fairly early in the game, and by putting these items here, you give the player a leg up if they're struggling to learn the new controls, and this is especially true for young children. Into the Machine is one of the first levels available on Raleigh's ship, and it's probably the best as it offers a variety of different platforming challenges. By reaching the end of the level, we will end up destroying the storm machine that Raleigh is using to sink nearby ships. Bentley starts the mission by telling us how to deal with a wall vent that is spewing fire, and once again, the player is robbed of the chance to figure it out for themselves. The level then moves on to some pretty basic platforming, although I love how the platforms you traverse feel natural to the environment. Once again, it really emphasizes Sly's ability to dissect a room and plan the best route, and then act according to that plan, and it's really clever level design. The next room introduces a new challenge. If you aren't worried about collecting every clue bottle, you can just jump straight down. But by going for them, you learn the nature of jumping on these platforms, which is important because this level will test you on it later. Next, we enter a room with electric spinning fans that will zap Sly if he touches them. Understanding Sly's exact position in relationship to these fans can be tricky, so it was nice that Sucker Punch included visual cues like the wire being faded in unsafe areas. We then come to a similar room to the one we just saw before. Here, though, we have to bounce back and forth on the platforms while waiting for the laser grid to go down. The timing of it adds a layer of tension to the moment. Executing this without falling lets us get all the clue bottles and also grab a sweet stealth kill on this enemy from above. Entering the final room of this area, we use the machinery to ascend to the device that breaks Raleigh's storm machine. I'm not really sure exactly how this piece of skull and hanging on it breaks the storm machine, but okay, whatever, sure, we did it, we broke his storm machine. We then get to the end of the level and grab the next key. The level offers a good introductory challenge for many of the basic platforming styles that the player will be engaging with throughout the title. This next level, High Class Heist, demonstrates what I believe to be one of the game's biggest shortcomings. And I basically just said it. Shortcomings. Short. This game is really short. What I'm trying to say is that most of the levels are short enough to be completed in under 5 minutes, at least in Raleigh's world and even the last world, as we'll see. I'd say in some of the other worlds, most levels can be conquered in less than 10 minutes. And this even factors into collecting all the clue bottles, although to be fair, I personally have done this already 3 times, so I kind of know where all the clue bottles are, and if you were going for them on a first try, it might take you a little longer. But to be perfectly honest, I worry that for some of these analysis paragraphs, I legitimately will have to loop footage because there's not enough of it to play while I talk over it. Yes, the levels can really be completed that fast. Anyway, I'm not trying to say that short length makes these bad levels, but it does lead to the game having a pretty minuscule runtime, especially after you've played it once before. To its credit though, this level does have an interesting laser defense set piece, but it wraps up so quickly, it's almost unbelievable. Back in the hub world, Bentley explains that in order to reach the next level, we're going to have to learn how to use this rolling wheel. By simply running on it, we can lower a platform that allows us to gain entrance to the start of the next level. It cleverly introduces us to the mechanic that will be featured in that level before we even enter it. And that level is called the Fire Down Below, and on the first go, we simply have to move the wheel continuously to speed up some hooks to get across the lava pit. Once we reach max speed, we latch onto a hook and use it to get over to the next platform. It feels fast-paced, and I always loved how Sly dangled around while moving here. Later, we must use the spinning wheel again, but this time a searchlight moves on and off of it. It's the next logical way to challenge the player with this simple mechanic, making it reach max speed while limiting how much time it can be spun. Of course, this good idea is almost negated by the fact that the wheel stopping completely doesn't really lead to any negative consequences on the players except slowing them down a wee bit. The rock will just kind of sit there and wait for you to move the wheel again, and it kind of defeats the whole purpose of the challenge in the first place. Reaching the end of the level gets us all the clue bottles, but in a twist, the safe is placed at the beginning of the level. It would have been interesting if the player had to traverse backwards in some interesting ways to reach the safe, maybe using the spinning wheels in a different way. But alas, that doesn't happen. You just hop backwards, and instead you just see how small the level really is. Out of all the levels in this opening world, a Cunning Disguise is the one that commits most to a singular platforming mechanic. Every level in the game fits into one of the following 4 categories: platforming, platforming with a gimmick, a mini-game, or a boss fight. A Cunning Disguise fits into the platforming with a gimmick section, as throughout the level, the player can only continue traversal by hiding in a barrel. Sly can absorb lethal darts while in the protection of the barrel, and he can also avoid detection by guards so long as he stands still while in the barrel. This challenges the player in a way that the game has yet to do so far, by restricting your mobility. The player is kind of metaphorically tied to the barrel because it is required to reach the end of the level. What this means is that sometimes Sly will have to scout ahead before returning to the barrel, and by forcing the player to keep track of something, they are making the level more engaging. Before we wrap up this stage, I have to mention that a few of the clue bottles in this level are hidden behind this movable bookcase. With so many clue bottles out in the open, this may feel cheap, but I kinda like it. After finishing up the first 4 levels, we are free to unlock the gate protecting the generator and smash it to pieces. This grants us access to the last 3 stages of Raleigh's world. Sly and Bentley decide that the only way to reach the crazed frog is to shoot Sly out of a cannon that is currently locked down tight. And Sly's excitement at the thought of launching himself out of a cannon creeps out Bentley, and it becomes clear here that Sly relies on Bentley mostly to point him in the right direction. Sly's actual reliance on the skills of Bentley and Murray would become more prominent as the series went on, but during this first game, Bentley acts mostly as a voice explaining what the player is to do. Still, you get some comedic bits at least. This brings us to our first minigame level, Treasure in the Depths. So including boss fights and the tutorial, there are 40 levels in Sly Cooper 1, and 11 of them are mini-games. That's about 27% of all the levels within the game. In fact, let me break it down real quick using the 4 categories I mentioned earlier. 27% of levels are mini-games, 12% are boss fights, 42% are regular platforming levels, and 19% are platforming levels with gimmicks, with the line between regular platforming levels and platforming gimmick levels being a bit blurred. To put it short, I don't love those numbers, and I think there's way too many minigames, most of which revolve around shooting, which seems like the antithesis of the actual stealth platforming that the game focuses on. Anyway, as we reach these minigame levels, I will talk more about why I think they hurt the game more than help it. For now, we have a twin-stick shooter level where Sly must break treasure chests in order to get a treasure key. I mean, I don't really understand why he can't just grab the freaking key. It's right there, Sly. It's sitting right there. But you know what? I guess the game's got a game. The challenge comes from these crabs who try to steal the chests away. And even if just one of them gets away with a chest, you have to restart from the beginning. It's frustrating, but again, I don't want to lay out my whole argument against the minigames in this one level. The shooting is fine, and it feels responsive, and I have no complaints with how the mechanic was implemented, but instead, my turmoil rests with the why. The last level in Raleigh's world is the Gunboat Graveyard, and it's a fairly standard but well-designed platforming level. I think now is a good time to explain the clue bottle system. In every platforming level, there are a bunch of clue bottles hidden throughout the level in various places. Most are out in the open, some require a quick platforming maneuver, and a few are very well hidden. Collecting them all allows Bentley to decipher the lock code on the level safe. Unlocking a safe allots Sly one page from the Thievius Raccoonus that gives him a unique power-up. More on these power-ups later, but for now, notice that I put power-ups in quotes. The clue bottles themselves encourage the player to focus on the levels a bit more and give an incentive to revisit them if they don't find every clue bottle on their first go. I personally have completed this game so many times that I know where just about every single one of them is, but I imagine for first-time players, a guide may be useful. Taking time to find every clue bottle may give players the impression that levels are longer than they actually are. And that's probably why the developers included the system. At the very least, it was an unintended benefit of incorporating clue bottles, and it ties in quite nicely to the narrative and the thief motif. Collecting all 7 of the treasure keys allows Sly to awkwardly launch himself out of a cannon and fight Raleigh. Out of the 5 boss fights in the game, I'd say this one ranks right in the middle. The dialogue exchanges between Sly and bosses before they fight is really our only chance to get a true glimpse of the villain's personality. And in most cases, I like the exchanges, but they definitely leave me wanting more. Raleigh's fight is all about combining platforming and combat. The level does a good job of escalating the tension and forcing players to learn a short pattern because you have to keep track of when Raleigh will become vulnerable. Those moments of vulnerability are harder to keep track of as the fight continues, as platforms begin to sink and your area to stand on shrinks. No boss fight in this game is overly complex, but all of them set up a mechanic and then escalate it, and Raleigh is the trendsetter for this. After beating the amphibian, he foreshadows what we will face in episode 2 before promptly fainting and getting arrested by Carmelita. By bringing her back in this cutscene, it reminds the player that she is still hunting Sly down in case they had forgotten about her. We also grab Raleigh's section of the Thievius Raccoonus, which teaches us a new platforming technique while getting some more backstory on one of Sly's ancestors. And I gotta say, showing off Sly's ancestry continues the game's efforts to have a strong sense of world building, and I absolutely love it. With Raleigh out of the way, we are free to move on to our next crime lord, and his name is Muggshot. The opening cutscene of this chapter informs us of how Muggshot was once a weakling who got bullied, but this, paired with his love of mobster movies, motivated him to get strong enough that no one would ever mess with him again. Muggshot is your standard all-brawn and no-brains character, with his weakness coming in the form of his intellect, or maybe I should say the lack thereof. Either way, Sly is once again eager to take down another member of the Fiendish Five, and this kicks off our second chapter in the game, Sunset Snake Eyes. Before we can take down Muggshot, we first must reach his domain. Using the new Ninja Spire jump technique that we learned in Raleigh's section of the Thievius Raccoonus, we can now land on narrow points. That makes it sound like we're introducing some new ability for Sly, and in theory that should change up the gameplay a bit. But in reality, it requires the same input as any other super stealth move, which is of course jumping and hitting the circle button.
To landeth safely upon diminutive points, leapeth lively and presseth the triggering device with the round geometrical object emblazoned upon it.
So jump and hit the circle button to land on narrow spots.
That's a rough translation.
For this level, I want to talk about how the game uses yellow laser security systems as a challenge for players. These laser setups are contextualized in the game world as a defense system used to keep away intruders, which makes sense. They can also be combined with other regular platforming challenges to put some more pressure on the player to get it right. With Sly dying in one hit without a lucky charm, I appreciate that these laser setups aren't a one-hit knockout. Instead, you get one screw up before the lasers become red and will kill Sly whenever he touches them. My only complaint with their inclusion is that it's weird that these systems wouldn't just cover up every square inch of available platform. I mean, I know it's a game, I understand that, and so this is totally a nitpick, but it would be a pretty half-baked security system to use in your own life. Either way, they continue to aid the premise that Sly is a master thief, and so I appreciate their inclusion. Wrapping up this level leads us to Muggshot's turf, where Sly deduces that the meathead bulldog is most likely living in a giant fire hydrant. Okay, honestly, this is gonna be another nitpick, I acknowledge that, but I always found it weird that Bentley agrees with this deduction. I mean, I get the stereotype that dogs pee on fire hydrants, but what does that have to do with living in one? I don't know, I probably just need to let that one go. But as we work further towards the casino, we are introduced to Muggshot's voice as he commands his dogs to beef up security as a cop has been spotted prowling the grounds.
Yo, hey, yo, it's the boss. You know, I need a voice to admit that maybe driving everyone out of town, while necessary to set up shop, might have taken a hit out of their business. So, now I hope you mugs will be obliging to any visitors that come here to lose their money in my casino. But I got a reliable tip that a cop might be stupid around the operation. So from now on, greet any visitors you see with a hail of lead. Capiche?
This is a fantastic way of foreshadowing Carmelita's appearance in one of the later levels for this chapter, and from here, we are free to start collecting more treasure keys. This brings us to our second minigame level in Sly 1, and it's called At the Dog Track, and it's a racing level. Out of all the minigames in Sly 1, the Murray racing-based ones have to be my least favorite and feel completely ham-fisted. It's clear that the developers struggled to develop Murray as a character and to find ways to include him within the title. Given how much time Bentley and Sly spend communicating, it's easy to forget that Murray is even with them at all. Outside of driving, he seems to offer no value to the team, and he's easily the weakest character of the title. That being said, they had to include him somehow, so they dumped him into some minigames. Here, we learn that Murray went out for a snack and got challenged to a race for a treasure key. Man, that makes no sense, you may be thinking, and that's because it doesn't. Why would the guards who are protecting the key for their boss even offer up anyone a chance to win it away from them? What do they have to gain by challenging Murray to a race? I mean, it makes no sense. Are you kidding me? You are gonna risk your job and most likely your life by pissing off your boss if you lose this key, yet you love racing so much that you just say, fuck it, I'm in, let's do this. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, especially considering if you fail the race, they will give you infinite opportunities to race again. It's like they don't even want the damn key. I hate it. I really hate it. The mechanics of driving are okay. I mean, the van feels floaty to control, especially when going around sharp turns or using nitro boosts. These races always seem so random to me because I never change up my strategy, yet sometimes it works and other times it doesn't. Sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, seemingly regardless of the decisions you make while racing. You can race exactly the same every time and get a different result every time, you just have to keep doing it until it's over. The entire level contributes nothing to the main mechanics that you see in the platforming levels, and it also makes no sense from a story perspective, so I just really don't get why they included it at all. Murray deserved better than this. Funny enough, we go from my least favorite level in the entire game to my most enjoyed one, the Boneyard Casino. In terms of atmosphere, this level is probably the best, as the abandoned casino is patrolled heavily by dangerous guards while the gambling machines are still working and lighting up the area. The level design is superb, and it gives the player chances to see the level from many different perspectives, whether it be looking down on guards or through long hallways. The platforming challenges are varied, but also fit perfectly within the casino backdrop, and the best example of this would be the roulette wheels you have to navigate at the end of the level. Out of all the levels, this one really strikes a good balance between moving horizontally but also vertically, and I really love it if you couldn't tell. I also like the opening combat challenge, which forces you to navigate between 4 flashlight guards in a very narrow area. It's one of many ways the game will challenge you during this level, and at some points, it actually feels a bit difficult, at least compared to other levels within the game. So to sum this level up, I love the atmosphere, I love the platforming variation, I love the level design, and there's one more thing that I love about it. Given that this is a casino, it only makes sense that we discuss the role of coins within the game, as I'm sure you've seen a ton of them by this point in the video. Coins are scattered throughout every level, and breakable objects will also drop coins. When Sly gets his mitts on 100 coins, he is rewarded with an item and his coin counter resets to 0. The first reward is a blue lucky charm, the second is a gold lucky charm, and the third is a 1-up. The reward is always the next step up from whatever Sly currently has, so if he already has a blue lucky charm, when he hits 100 coins he gets a gold lucky charm. If he already has a gold lucky charm when he hits 100, he will automatically be rewarded with a 1-up. In more open space levels, coins will also be used to guide the player towards the level's conclusion. Now, usually I really don't care about coins because you can only collect a few of them at a time, but in the casino, that changes. Just about everything in this level doles out way more coins than any other breakable objects in the game. On top of that, there's this semi-hidden hook that you can pull to collect a bunch of coins at once. Finding this is a nice way of rewarding the player for taking the time to study the level a bit, and I make sure to hit this every time I play the level. There's not really a reason for why it's completely necessary to get more lives, but if you wanted to, the Boneyard Casino becomes the best place to do it because of just how many coins you can get at once. To wrap up this section, let me state I wish every level in the game was built with platforming that matched the standards set by the Boneyard Casino. Scrap the minigames, give me more levels like this. Sucker Punch giveth and Sucker Punch taketh away, as the next level returns us to our second Murray minigame. This time, Murray basically says fuck it YOLO and decides to do his best Sly impression to go after a treasure key. You would think this might give the player a chance to actually play as Murray, but no. Instead, you just jump on a turret and have to protect Murray as he makes the run for the key. And knowing what Murray will become in later games, it becomes kind of strange seeing him cower in absolute fear at a dog holding a stick.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer? Every night, I can feel my leg and my arm.
Regardless, the shooting does demand a certain level of skill from the player, as there are many times when you can accidentally shoot Murray, leading to a reset. The level also tests to make sure you're paying attention to what you're shooting, as sometimes doors will open and normally guards come out, but sometimes it will be explosive barrels that if you shoot them, you're gonna kill Murray. This level can be pretty trial and error, but I've played it so many times that it seems kind of simple, at least to me. Part of my bias with analyzing this game is that it may feel easier to me than others simply because I've played it so many times before, and it's hard for me to separate those two things. Regardless, this level type is another unneeded minigame that doesn't contribute to the game's best levels and core design, that of course being its platforming. Luckily, that wraps up the last of the minigame levels in Muggshot's world, although we're about to be beaten over the head with them again soon. Now that we have all the treasure keys on the outside, we can unlock the next few levels, and we do so by freeing this speeding car that is going in reverse really fast with no driver for some reason.
That's a lot of damage.
Out of all the ways we unlock the second set of levels in each world, this is easily the most contrived and strange. It's weird. It's weird, but okay. Straight to the top is our next level, and its platforming challenges are focused more on moving vertically instead of horizontally. Our goal here is to reach a giant wrecking ball that can break the glass protecting the treasure key. I love this little doodad machine that just pukes out clue bottles, by the way. I love this thing just as much as I love the coin machine in the Boneyard Casino. I also like Muggshot's commentary at the end of the level, as his threats set the stage for the fight to come. Outside of that, I don't have a lot to say about this level, so I'll briefly talk about the game's music. The game's soundtrack was composed by, and I'm almost certainly butchering this name, Ashif Hakik, whose other work includes creating the Tumba 2 soundtrack and assisting on the music in Twisted Metal 3. Regardless of not being a household name, I think he really nails the soundtrack in this title. The songs are relatively simple, but that pairs nicely with the cartoon nature of the game, and the tunes are quite catchy. But I'm not some musical genius, so all I can really say is that I like the music across the game, and I think each piece fits nicely into its designated level. Also, most of the soundtracks have a bass line that gets added onto when the player is spotted by an enemy. It's a good way of informing the player that they have been compromised and must now deal with a threat by either fight or flight. Once that threat is neutralized, the soundtrack returns to its normal rhythm and beats. I think it's a job well done, and it's actually easier for me to recall songs from this game than in any other Sly game, so it's 2 thumbs up in my eyes. Or maybe I should say ears. Our next level, 2 to Tango, pays off Muggshot's earlier comment that a cop has been spotted prowling the grounds, with the reveal that Carmelita's here. Again, I love the dialogue exchange between Sly and Carmelita here, as it further establishes their unique dynamic. This level's gimmick is a really good one, as Carmelita shoots at you while you're platforming through the level. It adds a certain level of tension as the player's movements are constantly being tracked. What this means is one false move or taking too long to decide where to jump will often get you zapped by the shock pistol. This level plays out by seeing you get chased for a bit before getting some downtime halfway through the level. This allows the player to catch their breath a bit if they struggle to outrun Carmelita. Gaining access to the level safe once again gives credence to this section being a downtime from Carmelita because it's designed in almost a puzzle-like way. 2 guards block the entrance to the safe, and it can only be reached by stealthily taking out the bogeys from behind and from above. Of course, if you're like me, you forgot a clue bottle and will have to replay the level again to unlock this safe. The nice thing is, once you break a clue bottle, the game remembers that you found it, meaning you can come back anytime to any level to track down any remaining ones. This level wraps up with another Carmelita chase sequence that is more challenging in the fact that there is less available space for Sly to stand on. This means the player is pressured more, and it's a good way of escalating the challenge you just introduced in a meaningful way. The level ends by breaking the cage holding the treasure key, which sends Carmelita sailing away on a big balloon, presumably to oblivion, given how she fades into nothingness. Our last platforming level in Muggshot's world is called Back Alley Heist, and it's presented in one of the most unique ways out of any level in the game. It's shown from a side perspective, making it somewhat of a 2D design, except for the fact that it's still in 3D. Listen, I never said I was the god of explaining things perfectly, okay? This level is genuinely pretty challenging if you're going for all the clue bottles, because as you get into the level at a certain point, you can't move backwards, meaning if you miss a clue bottle, you're going to have to reset the level in order to get it. There's also a bunch of little nooks and crannies, well, at least to other levels in the game, that have coins and clue bottles for you to uncover. The side perspective is a breath of fresh air, in a good way, because the strength of the platforming isn't set to the side for some stupid minigame. Instead, they found a way to present the platforming in a new and interesting way. Kudos to Back Alley Heist, it's a great level. With all 7 treasure keys now in our possession, we are free to take on Muggshot himself. Out of all the villains' dialogues with Sly, Muggshot's is my favorite. His inability to read the book he stole clearly conveys his low level of intelligence, but his sheer size ensures he will be a threat. By the way, this line from Sly always makes me laugh. Every single time, it at least gets a chuckle out of me.
Some scrawny rat with a stick! Hey, wait a second. I seen that stick before.
Maybe when my father knocked your block off with it.
Also, I love how right before the fight starts, Muggshot says he feels transgressed and violated. Pretty big words for this dummy. It makes me think that Muggshot is aware of his intellectual shortcomings and has one of those little calendars that features a word of the day for you to try to work into your everyday life. That makes me laugh every time too. When a game can make me think more about its characters like this, I applaud it. Unfortunately, the fight with Muggshot is kind of underwhelming and will seem pretty cheap to new players. Given his weaponry, attempting to take Muggshot head-on will only lead to death, and it isn't immediately obvious what players have to do in order to win. The answer is, wait for it, because this is so stupid. You have to use the mirrors in the room to reflect light back on Muggshot, which causes his guns to melt. What? What? What is that? What? Oh my god. Well, the crystals throughout the room can act as shields, but Muggshot's bullets can also be leapt over. Not only is this hard to piece together on a first playthrough, but dying at any point sends you right back to the beginning, and because this level is so unconfrontational, it just feels tedious to have to try over and over again. Even after doing this fight countless times, I still died once and had to restart. It's not unfair per se, but it isn't very well implemented and will frustrate a lot of players who wanted an awesome fight with this badass bulldog. In the end though, Muggshot goes down to light, and you recover his section of the Thievius Raccoonus, which unveils the rail slide technique passed down by Tennessee Kid Cooper, a more recent ancestor of Sly's. Muggshot gets arrested and carried off by Carmelita, which wraps up Sunset Snake Eyes and this chapter of the game. Our next bad guy is the swamp mystic, Miss Ruby, an alligator who, like Muggshot, was bullied during her childhood, and this led her to a life of crime. She was an outcast from the start as her family practiced dark magic, and this definitely creeped out her classmates. Miss Ruby then began to harness her own mystic skills, and it eventually landed her a job in the Fiendish Five. If I haven't mentioned it yet, let me just say that the Fiendish Five sucks as a criminal empire, at least for how they're explained in this game. Sure, they take out Sly's parents, but they don't really seem to have any big plans or next steps for taking over the world, at least as a team. They're just kind of there, like, hey, look at us. We're the Fiendish Five, and we're evil. I mean, don't get me wrong, I like the characters, but they're supposed to be bound together as a team, and you never really pick up on that throughout the game, outside of when they name drop each other after being defeated. As we will soon see, Miss Ruby's hideout is the most conflicting out of the 5 we will visit, as it has some really high highs, but also some really low lows. To put it simply, 2 of the best levels in terms of challenge and design are found in her lair, while simultaneously, the worst 2 levels are here as well. I mean, these are seriously worse than Swamp Ass. Get it? Because it's a swamp? The Dread Swamp Path is arguably the best designed level in the game in terms of its challenge and variation, and it's one of the 2 best levels I just alluded to a moment ago. We start by practicing the rail walk and rail slide technique that we learned in the last episode, and are given a chance to test it out after learning that Bentley is a germaphobe. The level quickly ramps up the difficulty by asking us to platform down ropes while sliding at fast speeds and having to react quickly on where to jump next. I love it! So far the game has been a cakewalk, and finally there's some solid, well-designed tension while platforming. We also have some enemies that I deal with rather easily, but that were notoriously harder to deal with when I was a kid. I recognize that that's a bit anecdotal, but I genuinely believe that the enemies in this world are harder to deal with and killed me more often than any other in the game. And I wouldn't be surprised to hear similar testimony from other fans. Also, yeah, I swear, we'll get to talking about combat eventually, just not yet. The platforming brings us to a guard camp where we must sneak around and take out both foes and candles of all things in order to collect Miss Ruby's first treasure key. This challenge is completely different than the one we just did, but it can still be thought-provoking as there are 5 different flashlight guards patrolling the very small area with only narrow pathways to move along. This section right here does display one of the game's biggest presentation flaws though, and that would be pop-in textures. There's a lot of it in Sly 1, and it never gets as bad as this, where textures and literal guards pop in as you walk down the ramp to start the challenge. After taking down the guards, we're free to move on, but first let me reiterate how great this level is. It introduces a new mechanic, even if it does just come down to jumping and hitting the circle button once again, but it builds on it steadily while making it more challenging each time, and ultimately it prepares us well for the next level, which is the other amazing one I alluded to earlier. Yes, I just said that the last level is arguably the best designed in the game. Yes, I said earlier that the Boneyard Casino is my personal favorite level in the game. But I gotta give it up to the Lair of the Beast, as it absolutely hits the nail on the head in terms of offering engaging and challenging platforming while also building tension within an incredible atmosphere. The level starts off just outside of a giant gate, where Bentley comments that Miss Ruby wants something kept out, while Sly posits that maybe she wants something locked in. This lays the groundwork for a bit of tension and unease for what may be lurking ahead. We then ease into the level a bit with some demanding platforming that requires a lot of movement in a very small area. Of course, most of this comes down to just jumping and hitting the circle button, but Sly's athleticism makes the player feel agile and good about themselves, even if the inputs are simple. After progressing through the level a bit, we eventually come down right to the water's edge, where Bentley is scared to see some plants rustling in the water. He comments that something huge is down there, and this again builds some tension in the player as they continue to wonder what the threat is. By forcing the player to move through the level a bit, it allows time for the tension to take hold, so that when the threat does arrive, it feels earned and more impactful. One thing that detracts from the tension a bit though is this checkpoint marker right before this small cave in the water. The combination of these two things pretty much gives it away that this is where shit will go down. Even so, seeing the giant snake pop out of the water and start hunting you down is sure to get your blood pumping on a first playthrough, and it challenges the player to execute the same moves that they've had so far in the level while under a more demanding time crunch. Take too long, and the snake will eat you up. The camera angle here is also a fresh perspective that seems like an homage to the boulder levels in the original Crash Bandicoot game. If you're trying to get all the clue bottles though, you'll probably die at least once because the developers didn't really account for the extra few seconds it takes to grab them up. But oh well, because by the time you reach the treasure key, it feels like you just barely outran the snake as it destroyed everything in its path. The Lair of the Beast maintains the core gameplay and introduces a new element to take it to a higher level, and it's fantastic. Before jumping to the next level, I'd like to take a moment to talk about how Sly is animated in this game, because I think it's quite good. When standing still, Sly will rotate through a few animations that all contribute to the idea that he is a thief, as his poses reflect this. His jump and double jump animations are equally as clean and have the little touch of him swinging his cane as he lands to balance himself. For the most part, he stays low to the ground as a thief would want to in order to avoid detection. I mean, dude's back has to be jacked by how often he's hunched over. His combat movement isn't as satisfying though, as he just kind of swings his cane back and forth, but again, the gameplay isn't focused on combat, so it's acceptable. To top it off, we have the super sneaky stealth moves, which are uniquely animated. For ninja spire jumps and rope walks, Sly will jump, spin in midair, and then transition into whatever unique animation the platform he is on requires. When climbing up ropes, he holds his cane in his mouth, which means he never has to slow down to traverse. Overall, I think the animation of Sly breathes a lot of life into him, which helps supplement and support the demeanor and lifestyle of this thieving raccoon. So far, I've been praising Miss Ruby's world, and it's because her platforming levels are some of the best in the game, but her mini-games are dreadful, and we find the first one here. Piranha Lake makes us drive around a small pond lighting tiki torches in order to get a treasure key, and just like most of the other mini-games, it feels 100% contrived. I mean, think about this for a second. We have to drive over fish in order to collect oil, to use our flamethrower to light tiki torches that somehow keep a gate closed because voodoo and reasons. It makes no sense. It's one thing for a game to include some variety to supplement or change up its main gameplay, but it's another thing to create mindless drivel that is the complete antithesis of the core mechanics. Sly is supposed to be a thief who goes in with stealth, agility, and smart planning as his strengths. So why do so many levels then insist on us shooting loud guns and blowing things up in order to get treasure keys? I'm getting ahead of myself on that point, but you'll see what I mean soon enough. The mini-games are such a far departure from the core gameplay that it amazes me that they were even included. They're unnecessary and should have just been replaced with more stealth platforming levels that twisted the main gameplay around instead of abandoning it. Our next level, a Grave Undertaking, takes us back to more platforming challenges. This is another level that's just straight up good old-fashioned platforming without any type of defining gimmick. Having the end destination visible right from the beginning of this level gives you some idea on how the level will be structured. The defining mechanic of this level is that ghosts will spawn out of gravestones and rush Sly, attempting to kill him. The level introduces and explains these stones that ramp up the challenge they present by various methods, such as grouping more of them together or taking away how much room you have to maneuver around them. This set piece right in the middle of the level is visually striking and rapidly sees the player shuffling between different platforming and combat challenges. Once we reach the upper portion of the level, the challenge increases a bit, especially during this part where you have to time your jumps around when the ghosts will rush you to ensure you have enough time to land and strike them down before you come in contact with them. I'll also add that this level can be one of the trickier to find all the clue bottles in, and some are very well hidden. A Grave Undertaking is a solid addition to an already great lineup of platforming levels within Miss Ruby's Fortress. Next up, we have another twin-stick shooter level that controls similarly to Piranha Lake. Here we are tasked with reaching the end of the level by shooting structures and enemies to clear a path to the treasure key, all while avoiding incoming attacks from said enemies. Out of all the mini-game type levels, these feel the most fleshed out, but there is still no way to deny that they are a far departure from the normal gameplay standards. Instead of continuing to harp about these mini-games though, I figured I'd spend some time talking about another aspect of the game while this level plays out in the background. The voice acting in this game is perplexing to me, as I think a lot of the performances are very well executed. However, I don't feel that way about our main character, Sly. Murray is also a weak point, but it's particularly disappointing that Kevin Miller's Sly Cooper didn't resonate as much as other characters, especially considering he would go on to perfect the character's voice in Sly 2. Here though, the voice lacks a level of cadence and tone, and it makes Sly's voice feel either nonchalant or flat at all times. This is how it comes off, at least in the Binocucom conversations with Bentley.
It's all you, man. Drive the van with the left analog stick, and if you manage to pick up any nitro power-ups, you can get a boost by pressing the square button. Go get 'em!
I'm on it!
What's with this industrial strength voodoo gate? Miss Ruby must really be trying to keep something out.
Or maybe she's trying to keep something in. And I was gonna give it to you as a little token of my... Hey, you know, that bazooka really brings out the color of your eyes. Very fetching.
You think?
Sly's voice lacks heart, and that's a shame. But that can't be said for Bentley and the 5 members of the Fiendish Five, who all go all out with their performances.
Oh my god, a green waterfall overflowing with bones and body parts. I'm telling you, the health department's going to come down big time on this dump.
What? My boys have been yapping about some big mysterious dude running around cracking skulls and this is it? You're the monkey wrench in my operation? Some scrawny rat with a stick. So, without further ado, let me make amends by exploding to gargantuan size and squashing you like the insignificant bug that you are!
Bring it on.
I will send you to your doom with the beauty of my new firework technique. Flame Foo.
The villains especially speak with bravado, and it breathes life into characters who really don't get a ton of time to shine because of limited interactions with them. For the most part, characters are sold on what I believe to be excellent voice performances. But, at the same time, Sly's leaves me wanting more. We wrap up the top-notch platforming levels in Miss Ruby's world with Descent into Danger, which is a straight-up platforming level. There's a lot of twists and turns in the level design here, and once again it throws a plentiful amount of platforming-based challenges at you. This level is unique in that you can't just grab all the clue bottles without backtracking, as some are only accessible by leaping off high points to reach lower points. In this playthrough, I had to venture through the first half of the level 3 times in order to get all the clue bottles. One stealthy element that this level nails is how often you're given a chance to pounce down on enemies to take them out from above. The ability to monitor the situation from a high vantage point, plan a strategy, and then execute that strategy makes you feel like a true thief, and a lot of credit needs to be put on the level designers who ensured this happened many times throughout the game. None more so though than in Descent into Danger. This level is also the one in which we get our now standard boss monologue where the world's big bad voices in to call out our raccoon hero.
Hey there, Sly Cooper! That's right, I know you're here. I've seen it in the stars. It's all over my tea leaves. I'm in your mind, raccoon. I know your game. You better run for it, or me and my voodoo children are gonna sign you up for an eternity of zombie servitude.
Unlike with Raleigh and Muggshot, Miss Ruby knows that Sly is the one responsible for her treasure keys going missing, and this slightly alludes to the fact that the Fiendish Five at least keep up on each other. Knowing that 2 of her comrades have already fallen, she is able to deduce that Sly is coming for her next to recover her section of the Thievius Raccoonus. This is one of the few instances in the game that alludes to the fact that the Fiendish Five are actually a cohesive team of villains. It reinforces the fact that the game didn't do a good enough job of making this evil team feel like just that, a team, when this is one of the only instances that even slightly hints at the Fiendish Five actually working together or communicating. Anyway, this level's one flaw is that it ends with a rail slide section that literally spawns a giant vine right in front of you to slide down. This vine goes right past areas that you were before and could have easily jumped on then if it had been there. It's appealing to see Sly zipping around at these fast speeds though, but it does rob the level a bit of authenticity. However, it successfully rounds out the platforming levels of this world. Now we come to what I believe to be the most out of place level in the entire game, and it's called Down Home Cooking. Yet again, another minigame level. Even though some of the other minigames seem to be antithetical to the experience as a whole, at least they double down across the game's length and make more than one appearance. This level doesn't do that. Instead, Sly must kill 50 chickens for a treasure key without getting blown up by the, well, I can't believe they're actually gonna make me say it, the bomb-totin' roosters.
I guess he needs them to make a big pot of gumbo, but he's scared of the bomb-totin' roosters.
Bomb-totin' roosters. Bomb-totin' roosters.
Be careful, or they'll blow you to bits.
That's right, a ghost wants to make soup, so he has Sly kill chickens for meat in exchange for a treasure key. Excuse me? What? First of all, why are these chickens not humanized in the same way that Sly, Bentley, Murray, and just about every other animal is within the game? I assume there's no humans in this world, so why are these chickens not people? And why is there even a timer for how long I can take to collect the chickens? Is the ghost that desperate for his gumbo? I mean, these are easy jabs to take at the game, I admit, but I'm gonna take them. Ironically, this level can be one of the hardest in the game on a first playthrough, and it's a one-off minigame that doesn't incorporate stealth or platforming at all, which, to me, makes it the most unnecessary level in the game. Subverting a player's expectations can be good every once in a while, but this isn't the way to do it. Luckily, on this playthrough though, I didn't even die once, and spent time just standing in the room so that I could have enough footage to play while I bitched about this level's inclusion. It holds up mechanically, I guess, but it's just out of place in this game, and it's easily the worst level and the worst minigame. Having satiated the ghost's desire for gumbo, we're free to confront the Haitian alligator, but not before being tormented with this awkward animation of Sly being blasted up to her lair. We get some good dialogue between the two, although I find it weaker than all the rest of the Sly to villain banters, and then the level starts promisingly with having to use our ninja spire jump to reach Miss Ruby. After damaging her, she reveals that once again, we will be engaging with a minigame in her world. That means half of Miss Ruby's levels are minigames, which is appalling, considering how good the platforming levels in this same world are. Sly 1 then briefly becomes a rhythm game for the next 5 minutes, and it's the most poorly executed mechanic in the entire game. First of all, in the Sly Remastered Collection, the music in this level is off, and doesn't align with the button prompts that the player needs to push. If you try responding by matching up with the rhythm beats, you will die. That means it's better to just go by watching the speed at which the notes hurtle towards you. That's right, the button prompts corresponding to the X, circle, square, and triangle buttons on the controller are the literal things that can damage you in this level. This fourth wall break makes all the times Bentley told you to jump and hit the circle button look like normal dialogue. But anyway, the notes hurtle towards you at different speeds, and if you mess up at all, you take damage and lose a charm or die outright. You have to complete this rhythm section 3 different times in order to beat the level, and if you die at any point, it's right back to the beginning. Every other level in this game hasn't challenged me too much on account that I've played the game at least a dozen times before. But this level killed me multiple times, and it's due to the fact that winning comes down to what feels like luck rather than skill. When you do finally reach Miss Ruby, you have to strike her before she literally teleports away. And it's a shame that smacking her doesn't result in the same controller vibration and sound effect as every other enemy in the game, because her boss fight is so frustrating that she is the only villain that I really want to hurt. Word of advice, grab 2 Lucky Charms before fighting her and just try to power your way through it after you learn the patterns. Miss Ruby is undoubtedly the worst boss fight in the game, and it makes her the most disappointing. Beating her gives us yet another section of the Thievius Raccoonus that teaches Sly how to literally turn invisible. Compared to what we've seen before, this power-up feels particularly powerful and honestly, just kind of unbelievable. You go from learning how to slide on rails to turning invisible. Kind of a big jump, don't you think? This brings us to the conclusion of Miss Ruby's world, and it leaves the player with a mixed reaction because the platforming levels are so well constructed, while the mini-games here rear their ugly heads a disgusting amount of times. Next mission now, and it sees the Cooper gang traveling to China to take on the Panda King. The Panda King is described as being an expert with fireworks who uses the beloved Skylighters as a means of destroying those who stand in his way. Eventually, he joined the Fiendish Five as the head demolitions expert and helped in killing Sly's parents. In terms of his backstory, he once again had a troubled childhood, so he got bitter and angry, and he decided to take revenge on those who shunned him. It's the same revenge plot we've seen with a few of the villains already. Now, it may not seem like a big deal that the villains share this revenge mindset at first, but when you consider that Sly is on a similar revenge projection, it creates somewhat of a conflict within the moral of the story. I mean, think about this for a second. Getting revenge for his parents' death will work out just dandy for Sly, but for many members of the Fiendish Five, who grew up in rough conditions too, it's not gonna work out so well. I mean, I get it. The villains do evil things, and Sly doesn't, but still, it's a tad strange. The Panda King's world is set in the mountains of western China, and so it's nice to see that a lot of the opening level is about Sly moving vertically instead of horizontally, as if he really is scaling the mountain to reach the Firework Master's stronghold. This focus on verticality is emphasized by this section here, early in the level, where you can look down and see just how far you've already ascended. Early on in the level, I die and lose my last life. Thanks a lot, Miss Ruby. I'm looking at you for taking a bunch of my lives away from me. And this results in a game over. However, there is no real consequences for a game over, except losing all your coins and having to restart the level, which really are not issues. The lack of consequences makes me wonder why they even included a life system in the first place. We're also introduced to a new enemy type in this level, a pair of monkeys, one of which will roll the other one down a hill at you, snowball style. If you get hit by the ape, you take damage. It requires the player to track a fast-moving object and then react quickly enough to avoid contact. The enemies in this game aren't super complex, but it's nice to see them at least introducing new concepts and ideas this late into the game. Of course, on the other hand, a first-time player will probably have spent only about 5 or 6 hours at most playing this game so far, and they're already in the second-to-last world. And if I'm honest, 5 to 6 hours seems very generous, as I made it here in about 3 hours while opening every safe so far. One of the game's biggest flaws is its length, as it only clocks in at about 5 to 6 hours in my opinion to complete the main story alongside of the extra content such as collecting all the clue bottles and another game mode that I'll discuss later. Maybe 7 hours. I'll give you 7 hours. But the problem of the game being short is only further compounded by the fact that such a significant chunk of the game's levels are mini-games that have nothing to do with the main gameplay style. I got a bit sidetracked there, but I wanted to talk about this Binoculcom conversation we get during the level. We see a firework fly out of the Panda King's lair and smash into a snowy mountain, which creates an avalanche that buries a nearby village. We later find out that the Panda King did this because the village wasn't paying its dues. The game really wants this scene to paint the Panda King as evil, but it's pretty unnecessary. First of all, we didn't get anything like this for any of the other villains yet, and second, it's hard to even care that much because we don't have any connection to the villagers. We haven't even seen any of them. For all we know, that village is abandoned. But anyway, it's evil for the sake of evil, but I guess I should concede this is a nitpick considering the target demographic of this game. Anyway, we finish up this opening level by having to run through a forest gauntlet that is housing a bunch of flashlight guards. This feels like the guards outpost at the end of Miss Ruby's opening level, only made harder by including more guards. It's another example of how the game elevates challenges, even if it's to a pretty small scale. Grabbing the treasure key here allows us to finally enter the Panda King's fortress. And there we are immediately greeted with the opportunity to engage in another Murray minigame, and this time it's the return of the shooting section. We're once again tasked with protecting Murray as he goes after a treasure key. The level plays out almost identically to the one in Muggshot's world, and it's only slightly more challenging. And guess what? All my complaints about minigames so far once again apply to this one. I really don't have too much to add except to say that sometimes Murray stands too close to the fireworks that you need to shoot to let him progress. It didn't happen to me this time, but there have been times in the past where I meant to shoot the firework and hit Murray by mistake, forcing me to restart. Those situations were annoying, but I guess I learned my lesson in precision shooting. By the way, did I mention 3 out of the 8 Panda King levels are also mini-games. Luckily, the next level, the Unseen Foe, isn't one of them, and it gives us a chance to try out our new invisibility move that we learned from Miss Ruby's section of the Thievius Raccoonus. By holding the circle button, we can turn invisible and avoid detection from guards, and if we've opened every safe up to this point, we can also utilize a power-up that lets us slow walk while we're invisible. This level's first half has a few challenges that allow us to utilize this invisibility trick, but ultimately, the whole power-up feels useless as this is the only level in the game that will require us to use it. Hell, it's not even required 100% if you brute force your way through with 2 lucky charms. What this means is that the invisibility power-up becomes more of a gimmick when compared to the ability to ninja spire jump and rail slide. I mean, even the only level that encourages the invisibility trick can't commit to it fully, as it isn't required during the second half of the level. Instead, the second half of the level sees the player traversing up a bunch of pagodas in order to reach the end of the stage. I realized at some point that I had missed a clue bottle and was attempting to look for it when I realized another criticism I have towards the game, and that would be its camera. For the most part, the camera in Sly 1 isn't very intrusive and controls how you want it to 90% of the time. However, it doesn't allow you to look up and down, which normally isn't needed when platforming. But when you're trying to search for clue bottles from a vantage point, it becomes super annoying. That's right, the game's camera only gives you control on the X-axis, not the Y-axis. You can move it left and right, but not up and down. Like I said, most of the time this isn't a problem and the camera works fine, but in these instances, it feels very restrictive for no real reason, at least not one that I can identify. To finish the level, we jump down the pagoda through laser grids, and I always like these sections, as the visuals evoke visions of high-stakes spy films. The Flaming Temple of Flame, great name by the way, is our next level, and it's home to some decent platforming challenges revolving around the temple itself. However, this is where I finally want to talk about the light combat elements that are present in the game. Now, there really isn't too much to say on Sly's end, so I guess this will end up being a breakdown of the enemy AI. Sly has one main attack, a smack with his cane that can be executed by pressing the square button. Sly technically has other ways of dispatching enemies, such as a dive attack, an electric ball strike, and of course, who could forget the bit where he turns his hat into a mine that can be blown up by remote detonation. That isn't a joke. It's real, and I'm not sure why, but it's real. Anyway, these other attacks are only unlockable through safes, and if you never bother with the clue bottles, the standard cane strike will be Sly's only offensive maneuver. Enemies, of course, will die in one hit, and Sly will die in one hit if he doesn't have a lucky charm. If you do have a lucky charm and get hit, the guards will go into this taunt pose where they can be easily dispatched while Sly is gifted a generous amount of invincibility frames. Ultimately, the enemy AI isn't anything too crazy. It's very simple, but it serves its role nicely, as guards act as a nice change of pace challenge from the usual platforming bits. Guards give the player another thing to consider when platforming through the levels, however, they don't have to think too hard, as most guards, outside of the flashlight variety, will go down easily if you just rush and strike them without hesitation. Most guards also only utilize one attack, and once you know it, you can dodge it pretty easily. The game includes a variety of enemies though, and each of them have a unique move, but most can be broken down as either a melee attack, a short range attack, or a long range attack. I mentioned this earlier, but the developers did a good job of making sure that they continued to introduce new enemies as the game goes on, and each of them move in different ways, even if they only have one attack to use. For example, the mosquitoes in Miss Ruby's lair will fly at you at a bit of a slower pace, while the ghosts in the same world will rush you quickly. Some guards will remain stagnant while attacking, while others will give chase. The monkey combo I mentioned earlier is a stagnant enemy, while these beavers in Raleigh's world will chase you down until they're dealt with or you die. It seems the team at Sucker Punch brainstormed a lot of ideas on how enemies should move or not move, and the way in which they could possibly attack. Then they mixed and matched these ideas to come up with a bunch of enemies that fit certain models, but all have a unique set of skills for the player to overcome. This T-pose enemy, though, is probably the biggest threat I've seen so far. The Temple of Flame is my personal favorite level in the Panda King's world, as it strikes a balance between challenging the player with platforming sections as well as with a bit of combat. I think these monkeys on the pole make a great set piece, as they don't break their concentration even when an intruder is amongst them. Finally, this statue at the end where we travel under it and then through it always feels satisfying. These are just another few reasons for why it's my favorite Panda King level, but again, that isn't saying too much when almost half the levels here are mini-games. While it won't be the last time you control the van in the game, a desperate race is the second and last time you'll race around a track as Murray. I don't have a ton to say about this level, and much of what I said about the first racing level also applies to this one. It's not strange for you to think that this level would be more challenging than the first because it comes later in the game and introduces the added challenge of ice patches that will see the van sliding around more. Inversely though, this level is easier because the rest of the racers stay bunched together, and if you know where to use nitros most effectively, you can blast by everyone within the first lap. From there, you just have to maintain your speed and stay upright, and you win easily. I've played this game many times throughout my life, and this seems to always be true. I think the developers may have thought the ice would really challenge players, and so they tuned back the opponent's AI to compensate, but they didn't strike a good balance with it. That is of course speculation, but I always leave this level thinking that. Next up, another movable turret section. Sweet! Yes, just what I wanted. Bentley mentions that the turret is made of the same rare metal as the one in Miss Ruby's world, and he deduces that it must have been made by the last member of the Fiendish Five. Just like the level in Miss Ruby's world, this twin-stick shooter tank section controls exactly the same. They must have been pretty fond of the twin-stick shooter mechanics they developed because they found a lot of ways to incorporate them throughout the title. Outside of the visuals, this level is very similar to Miss Ruby's. You start in a more narrow, confined area, and after shooting your way through that, the area opens up a bit with more enemies being thrown at you. Here, we have to shoot through ice blocks while dodging Monkey Snowball Man after moving through the Panda King's firework factory. It is what it is. It's another vehicle minigame level, and therefore, you already know my opinion of it. Our last level before taking on the Panda King himself is Duel by the Dragon, and it's another level where Carmelita pursues us as we platform through it. First, we have to make our way up to her, and as a side note, I always found it strange that Sly is able to start the fireworks in this world by smacking them with his cane. I mean, unless he has a little piece of flint on the end of it, I have no idea how the cane sparks them. I guess it doesn't need an explanation, and I'm not noting it as a complaint, I just find it weird. Although, given the Panda King's obsession with them, their presence throughout the world is certainly justified. After a bit of flirting by Sly to Carmelita, our hero calls out the inspector for her aggressive pursuit of him while they are amongst one of the world's largest illegal firework operations. Sly mentions that he is proud to steal from master criminals, and his Robin Hood persona is once again reinforced. Carmelita doesn't buy it though, and the chase begins. This level follows a lot of the same beats as 2 to Tango, the previous chase level, but it has an increased length, which is one way of upping the challenge. Another way the challenge has been elevated is that Sly can no longer just sprint and climb his way through the level, as there are sections where he is forced to use fireworks to create a new path. All the while, Carmelita pours down gunfire, which again adds another dimension of challenge. These levels always are amongst the most engaging, but I'm glad they limited their usage a bit. With Carmelita only popping up every so often, it keeps players on their toes, whereas having her appear in every world would have made her predictable and less impactful. That being said, if a few more of her levels had replaced racing or turret sections, yeah, probably wouldn't have minded that either. Reaching the end of the level has us using fireworks to take down Inspector Fox's platform, and this cutscene was always odd to me. She gives a foreshadowing testimony about how, when we least expect it, she will show up, and then seemingly falls to her death in an avalanche? I mean, how does she survive that? I'm pretty sure that was murder. Sly murders Carmelita here. I mean, come on, look at that. What else can you call it? I realized during my run through this level that I had missed some clue bottles, and while most stages are easy to backtrack in, Carmelita's are not. Playing it again, I collected the last few bottles and reached the final safe. However, Bentley informs us that this safe cannot be opened until we defeat the last member of the Fiendish Five. It feels very arbitrary and strange because the last power-up isn't all that of a game breaker. In fact, it's not even that useful for the game's time trials, which I'll get to later. But by forcing us to come back here, it reminds us that there is a touch of post-game content to tackle after a very short main story. With all the treasure keys in hand, we're ready to fight the Panda King, but first I wanted to talk a bit more about the game's power-ups. Every time you unlock a safe, Sly receives a missing page of the Thievius Raccoonus, and he learns a new move that can be used. Some of these abilities are passive, like taking no damage when falling into bottomless pits or into water. Others are related to the Binocucom, like being able to see breakable objects and clue bottles. Finally, the rest of the power-ups are tied to the triangle button and can be switched through using L2 and R2. These power-ups include a dive move that can be used in combat alongside the standard attack, an electric roll that lets Sly move faster and damage enemies at the cost of precision, a slow motion technique that makes for some cool shots, a mine that Sly can detonate remotely, a high-speed motion technique that speeds up all animations and in-game time, and finally, a decoy that Sly can use to distract enemies. For the most part, these power-ups are useless and are never needed throughout the game. Because they are optional content, they can never be necessary to have, which means their usefulness is handicapped. I mean, I guess some of them are okay, like the electric ball, high-speed motion, and dive attack, but others like the hat mine and the decoy feel so incredibly situational that they're hardly worth using. Sly 1 saves its best 2 boss fights for last, with the Panda King being the second best in the game. The opening dialogue between the two is expertly written and shows how these two can be diametrically opposed while still being on the same side of the law. Sly and his friends may be thieves, but they have a code of honor that allows them to maintain a good guy status, at least amongst themselves. However, Sly is the only one who feels like a true thief throughout the adventure, and I can't say the same for Bentley or Murray. Anyway, the Panda King's fight is a straight-up combat battle where we have to get in close and do some damage. Each time you take 25% of the Panda King's life bar from him, he will bounce you away and begin throwing fireballs at you. Running in a circle up towards him lets you dodge them pretty easily, but the statues will sometimes get in your way, which may cause you to take damage. On the other hand, you can hide behind the statues and they will absorb a fireball before being destroyed. Once you reach the Panda King, he will try to dispatch you using his new Flame Fu combat. Every time you get bounced away, he will incorporate a new move into his repertoire. The player has to learn the animation for each of these moves and figure out which areas are safe to be in when each attack is performed. Sometimes the player will have to jump a sweep or dodge to their left or right. Sly may be physically smaller and weaker than the Panda King, but his agility is what allows him to stay in the fight. The struggle between the two is constantly introducing something new for the player to consider, and it makes it one of the best fights in the game. As a little touch, I love how each time you chip away at the boss's health bars, their faces on the life bar changes and shows how much damage they've received. Defeating the Panda King gives us another section of the Thievius Raccoonus, but all it really does is outline some weapon modifications for Murray to make to the team van. After using the first 2 sections of the book to introduce new platforming abilities that evolve the core gameplay mechanic, the last 2 really don't add that much to the game as a whole. Unlike the previous bosses, the Panda King doesn't monologue to us, and it leaves the last member of the Fiendish Five shrouded in mystery, as Bentley informs us that he isolated the metal in the turret to a volcano in Russia. This concludes our last world structured in this way, where the player collects 7 treasure keys and then fights a boss. Our final world belongs to the villain Clockwork, who Sly fans will recognize as the ultimate antagonist of the entire series. It's strange though, because his presence in this title isn't very grandiose, but we'll get to that. Clockwork's world isn't like the others where you would have a central hub to move through to reach all the levels. Instead, as soon as you finish one level, the next one just starts up. And these levels are incredibly short, so you're going to be seeing a lot of looping footage during this part. Before breaking down each of Clockwork's levels, let me just say that it blows my mind how short this world is. Granted, I am a Sly veteran. That being said, I easily completed Clockwork's entire world in under 30 minutes, and that includes taking time to stop and start recording, as well as messing around a bit. The game is already short, and this final world goes by so fast that in a way it almost feels rushed, but I can't say for sure. I seriously wonder if the developers ran out of time while making the game, and so they were forced to abandon the hub area for this final world. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the opening cutscene, Sly comments that very little information is known about the mysterious Clockwork, but he has a suspicion that he may be the creature who has appeared in the backgrounds of all the photos he has collected so far in the Thievius Raccoonus. Watching those other cutscenes over again, you can clearly see Clockwork in the background of the photos, which is a nice little touch, and something that players may have overlooked. Anyway, this introductory cutscene wraps up quickly, because we don't really have a whole lot of information on Clockwork. Within this final world, the player will only be platforming 3 separate times, and only 2 of them are dedicated levels. The world opens with a Hazardous Path, a level in which Sly must once again control a turret and destroy obstacles that are threatening the van's safety. The controls here default to inverse, meaning that going up makes the reticle go down, and vice versa. This has been true for the other turret sections so far, but here it feels very janky and hard to control because the area you're shooting in is a lot more wide open. In the previous missions where you protected Murray, you barely had to move the reticle, but here, there's so many things going around on screen for you to kill or break that a lot of the time, it feels like you have to blindly aim and hope for the best. It doesn't really feel fair to the player, and I imagine a lot of first-time players will perish many times during this level. The level ends with Murray stupidly driving into a cave that is too low for the turret, so it ends up getting destroyed. It really makes me question Murray's intellect, as on one hand, it is implied that he built the turret, and he installed it, and did all the van upgrades on his own, yet he ends up destroying one of those improvements in its first time out in the field. It's another inconsistency that I believe highlights Murray's weakness as a character. Of course, you could argue that they simply needed a way to remove the turret in order to justify the play method for the next level. This is true, but it creates a lot of dissonance. The player is introduced to these upgrades and simultaneously loses them in the same level. It almost makes me wonder what the point of their inclusion even was. It would have been more beneficial to the player and the core gameplay as a whole if they had given us another platforming related maneuver, even if it was as useless as the invisibility technique. Next up, we have Burning Rubber, which is another super contrived mini-game where Murray must run over computers in order to collect their data. Bentley informs Murray, and by extension us the player, that there are only 119 computers and he needs at least 60 units of data. Sounds easy enough, right? But meanwhile, a group of fire slugs will also try to destroy the computers, so the player must get more than the slugs in order to win the level. First to 60 wins. This is the final driving level of the game, and it really doesn't do much to elevate the mechanic to a higher level. I mean, in addition to the normal driving setup, we also have the ability to attack fire slugs from the front with the shield bash maneuver, and this can be used to clear out slugs, which will be vital if you want to collect more than those bastards. But really, there isn't too much to it, and there isn't much for me to say about this level, and I completed it in under 2 minutes. Finally putting Murray's driving levels to rest, the player reaches a Daring Rescue, the first platforming level in Clockwork's world. Here, we find Carmelita trapped with no real explanation or understanding of how Clockwork captured her. It's a callback to Duel of the Dragon when she says, "When you least expect it, I'll be there." But hell, I don't even think Inspector Fox saw this one coming. As I've mentioned before, I can't help but to feel that Clockwork's world was rushed, and even if that isn't true, it can come across that way. There is no build-up to Carmelita being trapped, or really any explanation of what's going on. It just boils down to Sly needing to be the hero, while Bentley advises against it. The level itself is the penultimate challenge of the platforming techniques you've spent the whole game developing. This stage can be broken down into 2 parts. first having to reach a barrel, and second having to use that barrel to reach Carmelita. Now, at first, I thought maybe I could use the invisibility walk to get the whole way through the stage and beat it that way, but it's good to see that this wasn't a developer oversight, as the floor has pressure pads that still detect Sly's weight and get you killed. So it seems there's no way else to go but the intended path, which requires the player to ninja spire jump and climb around until he or she reaches the barrel. This part isn't very difficult, especially when compared to the second half of the level. Here, the player is asked to traverse a narrow area where spotlights are constantly shining down on the player, threatening to expose them. The barrel limits Sly's maneuverability, and so extra patience and timing is required on the player's part in order to succeed. This barrel section represents a large difficulty spike when one considers the fact that they haven't engaged with this mechanic since all the way back in Raleigh's world, and within that level, the challenge came from getting the barrel from point A to point B, not the part where it was required to get by pressure pads. In that level, a Cunning Disguise, the player could easily leave the barrel behind for a bit in order to travel ahead and take out any threats that would make transporting the barrel more difficult. Here though, that luxury isn't afforded to the player, and it makes this a really good challenge. Reaching the end of the stage, we see that the obvious trap is an obvious trap as Clockwork locks Sly into a cage and starts pumping a deadly poison into the room. This gives way to the only time that we will play as Bentley during the game, and just like Murray, it's done by proxy. Bentley Comes Through is another twin-stick shooter level, but this time the visual aesthetic is completely different than any other environment in the game, as it's stated that Bentley is hacking into Clockwork's technology in order to turn off the poison gas. Here we control an avatar that is moving through the cyber world, and our goal is to collect 13 power chips that can be used to override the system. The player's avatar is locked into small rooms where there are two main threats. First, there's the green walls protecting the chips that will damage the player if touched, and second, there is a Clockwork avatar who will shoot shurikens at the player. The green walls test the player's ability to be mindful of their surroundings and their ability to avoid them, while Clockwork's attacks are more straight up and test the player's dodging skills. Luckily, the player also has the option to shoot back to destroy both the green walls and Clockwork's projectiles. Bentley is also gifted a health bar in this level, meaning he can take a few hits before dying, and tuning it to 5 hits seems to be just the right amount. Despite my constant moaning about minigames in this level, I do stand by the inclusion of this one, as the concept of playing as Bentley is a worthwhile addition to the game, considering we've had time controlling both Sly and Murray already. Winning this hacking challenge stops the gas, and Sly is miraculously fine. I guess all the air he breathed in didn't hurt him too much, despite the fact that it freaking knocked him out as soon as he breathed it in once. That's just another thing I find strange about this world, and why it feels so rushed. Here's a quick fact. I've already beaten 4 out of the 7 levels in Clockwork's world, and it's only taken about 15 minutes. Can you see why it feels so rushed? Every level is one-dimensional. Finishing the hacking allows us to free Carmelita, and I figured, you know what? Fuck it! I'm gonna use the Hat Mine to free her. Finally, a use for this power-up! Releasing Inspector Fox leads our police heroine into having a change of heart, as she recognizes the severity of the situation and decides to team up with Sly in order to defeat Clockwork. Although, she does mention she's coming for him next. Sly learns of a jetpack he must reach, but before he can head out, a mechanical bird steals his cane, and Carmelita must protect Sly as he attempts to retrieve it. The cane is one of my personal favorite video game weapons of all time, and it's a perfect match for Sly. Not only does it allow him to dispatch enemies, but it is completely required in order for him to pull off certain stealth moves. Sly feels naked without it, and this alone is a compelling enough reason to want to retrieve it. This is the third and final time in which the player assumes control of a turret and must protect another character, and this time we play as Carmelita protecting Sly. The difficulty of this level is elevated when compared to previous stages of the same sort because the enemies move faster and more erratically than before. Later in the stage, Sly will also get ambushed from behind, and unless you know it's coming, it makes this level more trial and error based than the ones before it. But just like every other level so far, it's over pretty quickly. A sinking Peril is our last platforming challenge, and it's easily the most difficult one so far. Sly is tasked with climbing Clockwork's giant death ray, which is sinking because, well, it just is. There isn't much of an explanation for why it's sinking, as Bentley tells us the devices holding it up got destroyed while Sly was going for his cane. Maybe it was these big yellow things, but I can't say for sure. Either way, Clockwork having a death ray is so half-baked, and one of the most generic evil bad guy things imaginable, and it's another reason why I feel the developers were rushed and couldn't flesh out Clockwork's world enough, although I couldn't find any information supporting that anywhere. The platforming in this level is one of the trickiest, not only because so many obstacles are confined into a small area with very little safe areas, but also because the player must race against the clock to reach the top before the lava completely consumes it. It's a very solid way of challenging everything the player has learned about the game's central mechanics, and I have absolutely no complaints with it. I particularly enjoy how the lava feels so close sometimes, yet Sly is able to just barely escape the hot, bubbly, molten liquid. Reaching the top allows us to grab Carmelita's jetpack, not really sure what it's doing up here, but okay, and this leads us into our final level of the entire game. A Strange Reunion is one of the most peculiar levels in the game because there are many reasons to love it and a lot of other reasons to criticize it. Here we finally come face to face with Clockwork, whose design is easily one of the best among all Sly Cooper villains, and I'd personally argue that it is the best. I mean, he's menacing, he's badass looking, and he lacks the goofy element that many of the previous Fiendish 5 members relished in. Clockwork has existed since the beginning of the Cooper line, and failed as a thief to live up to their incredible reputation despite many attempts to thwart them. He eventually decided to replace his flesh with iron and steel to make him immortal so that he could continue trying to end the Cooper family line. That detail makes Clockwork sound pretty badass, but it's never outright said in the game, and it's really only confirmed by Sly at the beginning of the sequel, which is a shame. Most of the information we learn about Clockwork is just dumped on us here through exposition before we fight him. This is one of the most disappointing things about the game. Everything has been building up to this moment, and Clockwork looks incredible, but all we get is an exposition dump and a 5-minute boss fight. This guy has so much lore and so much background, and as a player who has really enjoyed this world, I just want more of it, but this game never makes good on this front. This fight is 3 phases, and the first requires Sly to fly around dodging fireballs, while Carmelita aids Sly by shooting holes into Clockwork's armor. The guns on Sly's jetpack can penetrate these locations and damage Clockwork. Doing so about 5 times sends the bird spiraling into lava, and for a brief second, the player may think the fight is over, but this begins the second phase. Clockwork explains his reasoning for leaving Sly alive after killing his parents by saying that he wanted to show the world that the Cooper line was only successful because of the Thievius Raccoonus, which Sly rebuttals by saying that the reverse is actually true. The book doesn't make great thieves make the book. It's good that the developers included this line because it's only natural for the player to wonder why Clockwork wouldn't just kill off the entire family and be done with it. It gives us an explanation and an understanding to Clockwork's actions. Phase 2 of the fight is somewhat similar to Phase 1, but this time we must fly through electric rings in order to stay safe. Carmelita once again shoots electric bullets at Clockwork, and we follow up with a barrage of our own. There isn't too much to say about it, other than I'm not surprised that they found a way to put more shooting mechanics into the game. Clockwork's design is fantastic, but there's almost no way these two could have had a straight-up fistfight like the Panda King and Sly. Therefore, including a shooting section here is probably a concession that needed to be made if they didn't want to change his design. In our real world, owls also prey on raccoons, which makes this villain hero dynamic somewhat true to life. Clockwork once again crashes into the lava, and this time Sly is able to go in for the killing blow. The jetpack he was using just kinda goes away for some reason, and Sly falls down to a metal platform. The game offers us one more platforming challenge, and I really appreciated that considering it's the main core of the game. Moving through this section is no easy feat, and if the player dies at any point in this section, or while fighting with the jetpack, they have to restart from the beginning, making this one of the toughest boss fights in the game.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
As we reach Clockwork's head, Sly is given the chance to beat his head in using his cane, which damn, that cane must be pretty damn strong if it's crashing through metal like that. As we are approaching Clockwork, his AI is scrambled and he says some pretty random words, which I'm not sure have any meaning to them.
I am Blue 7. Flowers. Never. Lava Team. Play.
But as we finally reach Clockwork's head and actually start attacking him, he seems to regain control and vows that Sly will never be rid of him. And it's probably true, as Sly will most likely be haunted by the bird's vision for the rest of his life. As we finish off Clockwork in dramatic slow motion, the game's main story is concluded. Sly reflects on his journey and takes a second to appreciate the contributions of his companions, while also acknowledging his own growth. He grabs the last section of the Thievius Raccoonus, which apparently it didn't teach him jack shit because we don't get any more power-ups. Carmelita arrives and gets ready to throw Sly in jail. However, she stays true to her word and offers him a 10-second head start, which she had promised him earlier. We then get treated to a somewhat forced Romeo and Juliet moment where Sly kisses Carmelita and uses this distraction to handcuff her to a railing. This scene has always been strange to me, and I don't think the developers created enough romantic chemistry between the two to justify this moment. Sure, Sly has always been flirty, but for most of the title, Carmelita doesn't have much interest in romance at all, until after she is saved by Sly. It's a bit strange, but I can hear you right now in the comments typing out how it's a kid's game, so whatever, I'll let it go. This concludes the main story of Sly Cooper 1, but there is still some loose ends to wrap up in terms of gameplay, but before we get to that though, I want to take a few moments to reflect on the game's narrative. The story of Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus is very juvenile, but that doesn't mean it is undeserving of either praise or criticism. Now, obviously, the narrative here is used as a way of advancing the gameplay and environmental variety, and so it's safe to say it wasn't the main focus for the developers, and I acknowledge that. But that being said, a few clear themes shine through, and I think it's best we tackle them before talking a bit about character development. Let's start with pointing out the strongest of the game's two central themes: companionship. The game doesn't beat the player over the head with any of the themes, but this one is probably the most obvious, as Sly is able to prevail in his mission because of the support from his friends, and it's something he makes mention of in the final cutscene. Narratively, he is aided by Bentley, who is always guiding him in the right direction, and in terms of gameplay, Murray is aiding Sly by going out in the field and recovering some of the treasure keys. Meanwhile, despite being a quote-unquote team, the Fiendish Five never work together in any capacity during the main story, and that's why Sly and friends are able to defeat them. They never come to each other's aid or attempt to team up, and it allows Sly to pick them off one by one. In my mind, this is the game's way of emphasizing how relying on friends and family will always leave you better off than attempting something difficult alone. It's a pretty standard and simple theme, but it's a decent message for the younger audience playing these games. I'd say the next central theme is the concept of honor, and how there is still a moral code on the criminal side of the law. Despite being a thief himself, Sly's moral code aligns heavily with our own human understanding of right and wrong. He steals from master thieves who are purely evil and destructive towards society. Nowhere else is this brought to life better than Sly's discussion with the Panda King preceding their fight. The Panda King questions why Sly is so opposed to him burying a village when he too is a thief, and Sly's response is where we truly see his commitment to doing the right thing.
I see you carry Kane of Notorious Cooper Thief Clan. Have you come here for revenge? To steal back the Thievius Raccoonus?
That was my plan at first, but now I'm more interested in putting an end to your avalanche extortion racket.
Why should you care if I bury a few worthless village in snow? You are a thief, just like me.
No, that's only half right. I am a thief from a long line of master thieves, while you're just a frustrated firework artist turned homicidal pyromaniac.
And it's emphasized later when he saves Carmelita, despite the fact that she would like to see him locked up behind bars. Sly is a man of integrity, and he justifies his actions and goals throughout the game. In terms of storytelling, I'd say that the character development and growth is the weakest component of the title, as 2 out of the 3 protagonists don't change at all, and the final's growth is very ham-fisted. Let me be blunt here, Sly does not grow at any point in this game because he is never shown to struggle at any time outside of when he is briefly knocked out by poison gas. He starts the game as calm, cool, collected, and confident, and he ends the game calm, cool, collected, confident, and now with a book. Bentley doesn't change much either. He gets a heroic moment where he saves Sly at the end of the title, but it really doesn't demonstrate any kind of incredible growth or change to his character. Murray shows a little bit of growth, as it's implied that he is very timid, but through this adventure with Sly, he learns to be brave and take on tough tasks. However, since Murray gets the least amount of screen time out of the 3, the player could easily be forgiven for finding this growth not very inspiring or even noteworthy. I do realize this game isn't supposed to be narratively driven, and so I accept that the story and character beats do enough to drive the gameplay sections forward. With Clockwork defeated, all that's left to do is complete the game's time trials, but first, we have to head back to the last level in the Panda King's world to open the last safe. Here, we find a power-up that lets us temporarily stun enemies in the world, and I really have no clue why it was locked off from us until after we defeated Clockwork. I guess, in theory, it could make some of the time trials easier, but the fact remains that the animation takes a good second or 2 to cast, and enemies only get stunned for about 3 to 5 seconds, which hardly makes it a cheat code for time trials. On top of that, since Clockwork's levels don't have any regular enemies to fight in melee combat, the stun power-up wouldn't have been useful there either. So what was the point of locking it off in the first place? Maybe I'm overlooking some super useful benefit of the stun move, but even after racking my brain over it, I can't come up with anything. With the main story of the title being complete, players still have one more challenge to tackle, and it comes in the form of time trials called Master Thief Sprints. Our goal with these is to complete each platforming level before the timer runs out, and these are necessary for 100% completion of the game. When it comes to challenge, the difficulty is very inconsistent, as some levels can be completed easily in one attempt, while others will take 15 or more tries. Keep in mind, I've done these a few times before, yet it still took me a good 25 minutes to complete the time trial for High Class Heist, and that's one of the shortest levels in the game. I wish I could tell you that the difficulty spike for some of these trials is tied to the platforming levels that contain gimmicks, but honestly, that isn't the case. In most instances, challenge is derived solely by how much time the developers allotted to you to finish a level. Sometimes it feels gracious, and other times it feels brutal. It leads to an inconsistency in the time trials, and that makes them one of the most frustrating elements of the game. I mean, consider this. You can beat some trials in one go with relative ease, only for the very next level to take you 20 or more attempts. And finally, after a bunch of frustration, you conquer that challenge, only to beat the next level in one go again. It's frustrating due to the inconsistency in the way it challenges the player. Either make them all difficult, or make them all simple. While completing the more difficult trials, players will be tested on their understanding of the level layout and utilizing the roll move power-up they gained early in the game. Looking back, it makes sense that the roll move is one of the first power-ups you get because it can certainly help in some of these time trials, which are available to be completed as soon as a stage's key is collected. The roll move is finicky though, and it takes some practice to get used to before you can execute flawlessly in time trials. Even then, all it takes is one collision to stop Sly's rolling momentum and ruin the whole time trial. I wouldn't say the roll move is absolutely necessary for the trials, but it certainly helps. It's also nice that when doing a time trial, you can easily restart the level at any point within the menu, and it saves so much time. All in all though, despite the frustration and how much I just complained, I'm glad the time trials were included, as they can at least add an hour or so of game time to an already short title with very little replayability. Completing the game's time trials is worth it in the sense that it unlocks two features that show us some behind the scenes of the making of the title. The first is a very brief documentary, about 10 minutes long, in which some of the game's lead developers talk about developing Sly and the world and the mechanics of the game. It's a fascinating listen for fans of the franchise, and getting to see the commercials that advertise this game always puts a smile on my face.
Oh, this is bad.
Sly Cooper, he's one cunning, devious, Thievius Raccoonus. Rated E for everyone.
The other feature is by far the more enjoyable of the two, and it comes in the form of level commentary for all of the platforming levels within the title. In these, the developers talk more specifics about each level and the thought process and effort that went into creating each one. This is amazing. However, the Sly Remastered trilogy decided to not include these in-level commentaries, and it's very annoying as the most impactful reward for completing the time trials is stripped away. I'm not sure why they didn't include it, but I know it's something that makes a lot of Sly fans bitter. At least me, anyway. That being said, for the purpose of this video, I got on YouTube and listened to a playlist that featured each level's commentary, and there's a few things I want to highlight in kind of a bullet point method. One thing that really struck me was when the developers mentioned that originally the game was going to have a much heavier puzzle element to it, but ultimately they decided doing it that way would kill the pace of the gameplay. Personally, I wish the game had incorporated more puzzle elements to test the player, as they could have extended the game's length and challenged players in new ways. If their concern was about players not being able to solve a puzzle, they could have easily had Bentley interject with a hint after a set amount of time. A lot of the commentary the developers give is about finding ways to ease players into the experience, but they did too good of a job of that, and this makes the game quite easy in the end. In fact, at one point, a developer says, and I'm paraphrasing a bit here, quote, "We designed levels to give a perception of crazy difficulty, but make it very doable to make the player feel rewarded and to emphasize Sly's exceptional athleticism." End quote. Again, that's not a direct quote. I'm paraphrasing, but you get the idea. And this is good and all, but it makes the game far too easy. Lighting techniques is something I certainly don't feel comfortable discussing in any sort of analytical sense, because out of all the components that go into game design, it's the one I understand least, at least how it's created. That being said, hearing the developers talk about how they use different lighting techniques across a few different levels was actually very fascinating. I never noticed any hiccups in lighting while playing the game, so yeah, it's pretty darn good. Finally, in terms of level design, the commentators confirmed what I have mentioned throughout this video, that a lot of the levels were designed as either being big stages or small stages. At one point, a developer admits that one of the levels ended up being only a third the size of its original length, and it's hard to shake the idea that this may have been the case for many other levels, which I think is a real shame. At least it was interesting to hear about the ideas that inspired some of the levels. For example, Lair of the Beast was directly inspired by the gate to the island in the King Kong movie. The developer commentary reinforced a lot of the ideas I had about the game, and I'm grateful for their inclusion, as it always is great for dedicated gamers to see behind the scenes into their favorite titles. Before we reach the conclusion, I wanted to take a few minutes to briefly discuss a few random elements of Sly 1 that I couldn't really fit anywhere else into this video. Hub worlds serve a few different purposes in this game. One, they lend a sense of cohesion to the world so that levels don't just feel random, and second, they give players a break between levels. Clockwork's world does a decent job of connecting levels without a hub world, but it still feels like a random assortment of different arenas and rooms. However, I will concede that including a hub world in Clockwork's Lair would have required a complete overhaul of the levels we got. Still, I can't help but feel it would have been for the better. Graphically, the game looks pretty good and has held up quite nicely, and I know this is footage from the remastered version, but even the original still holds up pretty good. A lot of this is due to how the game utilized cell shading, and it makes the characters and enemies pop. Cell shading is one of those unique styles that hardly ever seems to age poorly, and Sly 1 is another example of that. For the most part, the hit detection in the game is pretty solid, and all damage dealt and received feels correct. Only one enemy goes against this, and it's the plant behemoth from Miss Ruby's world. After hitting this creature, it splits into two and becomes incredibly hard to dodge or hit, not because the beast is moving around quickly, but because the hitboxes aren't properly calibrated. It makes any encounter with this thing risky, and it's often best to run right past it. I mean, I lost on many a time trials due to this thing, and it was a direct result of this hitbox issue. Final point, the load times in the game are pretty solid, especially in the remastered version. Loading between levels or boss fights and the hub worlds are completed within just a few seconds, and this greatly aids in maintaining the atmosphere that each world and level try to evoke. Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus has two major issues. First, its short length makes it feel rushed and somewhat incomplete, and second, the game insisted on including too many mini-games that robbed the player's time spent with the platforming mechanics. The game has some other issues that can be nitpicked, but I think a lot of them are just that, nitpicks. The game absolutely excels at making Sly, and by extension the player, feel like the ultimate agile and sneaky thief by allowing them to pull off incredible feats of athleticism with just the touch of a button. The simplicity of the button prompts reflects Sly's prowess as a thief, and he can pull off incredible moves with ease. In addition, Sly is surrounded by an interesting but underutilized set of companions whose contributions would grow as the series went on. Sly 1 also introduced the fandom to 3 of the series' most iconic villains in Muggshot, the Panda King, and of course Clockwork, who would all go on to appear in later games. The developers placed a heavy emphasis on world building, and it succeeds brilliantly, as a sense of cohesion persists throughout the title. The reality is that Sly 1 set out to deliver us a new world with interesting characters and fun but casual stealth and platforming mechanics to play around with, and they succeeded. I'm sure many fans, myself included, wouldn't look back on this game and call it their favorite in the series, but in reality, its core stealth platforming components and lovable characters is what allowed the series to continue on. It put Sucker Punch in a great position to take what they had built in this game and expand on it further in every way with the narrative, the gameplay, and the graphics, and it's safe to say they did just that. This is certainly the title that newcomers to the series should start with, and despite its many shortcomings, I can't deny how the world building, the atmosphere, and the stealth gameplay set Sly up to be one of the most lovable video game protagonists of all time. As I sit here and write this final paragraph, I can't believe this script is 35 pages long and over 20,000 words. Wow, this project has already taken a lot of time and effort, and there's still so much to do, but that's okay because I loved writing all of this, and I know I'll love the rest of the process too. But guys, this video took about 2 months to make, and if you made it this far, yes, this is the part where I must shamelessly plug the rest of my work on the channel. First of all, if you like this video, be sure to let me know by hitting me up in the comments or on my Twitter at NopNapNarp. And if this video does well, and I see people are actually interested in it, I would have no problem sinking this much time and effort into making another long format critique video because I really enjoyed making this one. If you want to see some of my other work, feel free to check out the channel. You're going to find 2 main components, the first of which are reviews of games like Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, God of War, Marvel's Spider-Man, Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, and many more. The other meal ticket on the channel is the Psychology of Gaming series, where I use my experience as being a psychology teacher to break down certain psychological elements within video games. At the time of writing this, there are, I believe, 28 episodes in the playlist with a whole range of games discussed, from Fortnite to Telltale's Batman, to The Division, to Dark Souls, to Rime, to Bloodborne, and much, much more. And I discuss a whole host of different psychological topics in those videos, like moral development, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the power of friendship, the 5 stages of grief, and many psychological ailments even, like depression, anxiety, psychosis, and more. So please, it would mean the absolute world to me if you checked out some other stuff here on the channel and considered subscribing for more content. Anyway, I think it's time to send this video off with my standard outro. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Consider subscribing for more. Follow me on Twitter at NopNapNarp. And as always, Have a nice day, and take care.